grabbed her by the collar in the middle of a public parking garage and slammed her back against a concrete pillar so hard her briefcase exploded across the floor, papers scattering like confetti at a funeral. 7 men. 1 woman. The fluorescent lights above them flickering like they couldn't decide whether to witness this or look away. "Kneel," he said. Not a request. A sentence. Serena Vale looked at the hand crushing her lapel. Then she looked at his face, and something in her expression, not fear, not rage, but something colder than both, made him hesitate for half a second. Half a second was all she needed. If you've ever stood alone against something that had every reason to destroy you, this story is for you. Before we go further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. Stories like this one don't wait for you to catch up. Drop a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Every like you leave helps this reach someone who needs it tonight. Now, let's go back to that parking garage. Because what happened next changed everything. The rain had been falling since noon, and by the time Serena Vale pushed through the courthouse's heavy glass doors at 7:15 that evening, it had settled into the kind of steady, indifferent downpour that didn't care what kind of day you'd had. She had won. Not narrowly, not on a technicality. She had walked into courtroom 7 that morning with 46 pages of cross-referenced witness statements, 3 financial ledgers obtained through subpoenas the prosecution had fought tooth and nail to block, and a theory about the Vega Street Cruise operation that the arresting detectives hadn't even considered. By 2:30 in the afternoon, she had dismantled 4 of the prosecution's key witnesses on the stand so methodically that one of them, a man with a history of testifying for the state, had actually contradicted himself 7 times in 22 minutes. The jury foreman barely looked at the defense table when the verdicts came back. He didn't need to. The look on the assistant district attorney's face said everything. Her client, a mid-level accountant named Desmond Chu, who had made the catastrophic mistake of renting office space to people who turned out to be laundering money for the Vega Street crew, walked out of that courtroom a free man with his record intact and his CPA license still breathing. The Vega Street crew's enforcers, on the other hand, walked out in handcuffs. 3 of them, including Marcus Rell, the crew's primary collector, a man who had somehow never been charged despite 12 years of documented intimidation across the South Side. Serena had spent 4 months building the case that finally changed that. 4 months of late nights, cold coffee, and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from knowing that several people who don't want you to succeed know exactly where you live. She should have felt triumphant. Mostly she felt tired. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement of the parking structure's 2nd level as she fished for her keys, the sound bouncing off concrete walls in a way that made the place feel emptier than it was. She hadn't eaten since a granola bar at 11. Her left heel had developed a small crack during hour 3 of her closing argument. Her umbrella was in her office on the 14th floor of a building she was not going back to tonight. She found her keys. She pressed the fob. 40 feet ahead, her gray sedan answered with 2 quiet blinks. She was almost to the driver's door when she heard the footsteps. Not one set, several. She stopped. Didn't turn around immediately. Made herself breathe through the instinct to spin, because spinning was panic, and panic was information she didn't want to give away. There were 6 of them when she finally turned. Then a 7th stepped out from behind a support column to her left, completing the arrangement with the kind of practiced geometry that told her this had been planned. They weren't wearing anything that identified them. They didn't need to. She had spent the last 4 months looking at photographs of the Vega Street crew's remaining membership. She recognized 2 faces immediately, maybe 3. The one in the center, the one who was going to speak first because he was standing slightly ahead of the others, and his chin was lifted at that particular angle. Men lift their chins when they want you to understand that they consider themselves above negotiating, was someone she hadn't seen before. Late 30s, thick neck, a scar along his jaw that had healed badly. He wore a dark jacket over a white shirt, and his hands were at his sides, which somehow felt more threatening than if he'd been holding something. "Miss Vale," he said, like they were at a dinner party. She kept her breathing even. "It's Attorney Vale, but I'm guessing you didn't come down here to discuss titles." Someone to her right laughed. Not a friendly sound. "You humiliated us today," the man in the center said. The dinner party tone was already gone. You humiliated us in front of the whole city. Marcus is a good man. Those others, they have families. So do the people they hurt, Serena said. The temperature in the garage dropped about 5 degrees. She had made a calculation in approximately the last 8 seconds. Her phone was in the outer pocket of her briefcase, which was on the ground 3 feet to her left where it had landed when the man in the center's companion, someone she hadn't seen come from behind her, had knocked it out of her hand. She had not heard or felt anyone approach from behind, which meant she had been paying attention to the wrong direction coming off the elevator, which meant she had made a mistake. She acknowledged the mistake to herself, filed it, and moved on, because there was no version of this moment that improved by adding regret to it. "We want an apology," the man in the center said. "I defended my client with every legal tool available to me," she said. "The jury made their decision. The system worked. I won't apologize for that." "That's not the apology we're asking for." He took a step toward her, then another. The circle tightened. She felt it on all sides without looking, the way you feel a room shrink when there are too many bodies in it. "Kneel," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "No." "What did you just say to me?" "I said no." She held his gaze the way she'd learned to hold the gaze of hostile witnesses, without aggression, without submission, just presence, just the absolute refusal to look away. "I won't kneel, I won't apologize, and I won't be intimidated by people who just watch their best argument fall apart in open court." He moved fast, faster than she'd expected. His hand closed around the lapel of her jacket, and in one motion he had her back against the concrete column, her shoulder taking the impact badly, a flare of real pain radiating down her arm. And she was looking up at him from 6 inches away, close enough to count the stubble on his jaw. "You think the law protects you out here?" he said. His voice was very quiet now. "Out here, there is no law." She looked at his hand, then at his face. "Then why?" she said carefully. "Are you shaking?" He wasn't, technically. But the words did something to his grip. She felt a microsecond of loosening, just enough. And the fury that replaced it told her she'd landed exactly where she'd aimed. "You have about 2 seconds to say the words," he said. She said nothing. She heard the elevators. All 3 of them. The parking structure had 3 elevator banks, and all 3 pinged in rapid succession, an absurdly normal sound in an extremely abnormal moment. Then she heard engines. More than one. Quiet engines, the kind that came with vehicles that had been built to be quiet, not the kind that came with whatever the Vega Street crew was driving these days. The man holding her collar heard it too. She felt his attention split, everyone's attention split. 3 black SUVs rolled into the second level of the parking structure in a formation that was, she would later admit to herself, undeniably impressive in its precision. They stopped at staggered positions that blocked all 3 exit ramps and gave their occupants sightlines to every corner of the level. The engines cut out simultaneously. For approximately 4 seconds, there was no sound in the garage except the rain striking the concrete outside and the distant hum of the structure's ventilation system. Then the doors opened. 8 men emerged from the vehicles, not running, not shouting, just stepping out and positioning themselves with the unhurried efficiency of people who had rehearsed this particular choreography many times. They wore dark clothes. They said nothing. They simply occupied space in a way that made the Vega Street crew, 7 members strong, abruptly look very small. The last door opened on the middle vehicle. The man who stepped out was not what she expected. She didn't know exactly what she'd expected. She would struggle to articulate it later. But whatever image her mind had constructed for the person who commands enough fear to make 7 armed criminals go completely silent in under 5 seconds. This man didn't match it. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", lean in a way that suggested discipline rather than accident. His age was difficult, early 40s possibly, though his face carried a quality of stillness that made chronology feel irrelevant. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, his collar open, and he moved across the wet concrete in dress shoes without any apparent concern for the surface. He carried nothing in his hands. His eyes swept the garage in one pass. She had the distinct impression that in that single pass he had cataloged everything relevant, the number of his subordinates, the number of the Vega crew members, her position against the column, the briefcase on the ground, the cracked pavement near the 3rd exit ramp, and probably several things she hadn't noticed herself. His gaze settled on the man still holding her collar. He didn't say anything. He just looked. The hand released her so fast she nearly stumbled. The man who had been holding her took a step back. Then another. Then his eyes dropped to the concrete floor, and they stayed there. The man in the charcoal suit walked toward the Vega crew, slowly. He stopped about 8 feet away, close enough to be heard without raising his voice, far enough away that the Vega crew leader had to resist the urge to step back. "Do you know who this woman is?" he said. The crew leader said nothing. "She's the attorney who just put 3 of your people in federal custody," the man continued. His voice was measured, not loud, not theatrical, just the kind of voice that expected to be listened to and had rarely been disappointed. She did her job. She did it in a courthouse, in front of a judge and a jury, in a process that has been the same for 200 years. And your response was to follow her to a parking garage. He paused. "On my block." Something shifted in the crew leader's posture. "Mr. Draven," he started. "You embarrassed us," the man said. "Not her. Us. You turned a legal loss into a street confrontation, and you did it on property that carries my name. Every camera in this structure is running. Every one." He looked around the garage as if to indicate that this was simply a fact of the environment, the way gravity was a fact. "Your names are on all of them now." The crew leader had gone the color of old concrete. "What she did in that courtroom," the man in the charcoal suit continued, "she did because she was better prepared than the people across from her. That is not a reason for what I just walked into. It is a lesson. There is a difference." He looked at each of the 7 men in turn, not with contempt, with something more unsettling, a calm assessment. "You have somewhere else to be tonight." It wasn't a suggestion. It had the grammatical structure of one, but none of the optionality. The 7 men left. Some of them walked quickly. None of them ran. Running would have been the same as admitting they were afraid, and they still had too much pride for that. But they left, and they left without looking back. And the 3 SUVs rearranged themselves to create a corridor that made departure the only available direction. In 40 seconds, the parking level was empty except for Serena, the man in the charcoal suit, and 2 of his people standing at a distance that said they were present without being intrusive. Serena picked up her briefcase. She checked the documents, some of them damp, all of them salvageable. She straightened her jacket. She turned to face the man who had just dispersed 7 people with approximately 40 words and the quality of his attention. "Lucien Draven," she said. "Attorney Vale," he said. "I've read about you." She hadn't met him before. Nobody in her circle met Lucien Draven face to face and then casually mentioned it at breakfast. "Your organization is responsible for—" "I'm aware of what my organization has been charged with," he said. "And I'm aware of your record with cases involving my organization." Something in his expression, not quite a smile, but a movement in the direction of one. "You've won 4 of the 5. The 5th was decided on evidence suppression," she said, "not on the merits." "I know." She studied him for a moment. There was something genuinely disorienting about the fact that this conversation felt entirely normal, like they had run into each other at a conference and were discussing a panel discussion. "I don't plan to thank you," she said. "I didn't come here expecting you to." "Then why are you still standing there?" He looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. It wasn't predatory. It wasn't admiring, at least not in any way she recognized. It was more like the expression of someone who had just encountered a problem they found genuinely interesting. "Because," he said, "you told a man twice your weight that he was shaking while he had you by the collar against a concrete wall. And you meant it." He paused. "I wanted to see what your face looked like when it wasn't performing for a courtroom." She wasn't sure how to respond to that. She decided not to. "I have work tomorrow," she said. "Early. I won't keep you." He stepped aside, shut. Not elaborately, just enough. "Attorney Vale." "Mr. Draven." She walked to her car. She didn't hurry. She started the engine, backed out of the space, and drove toward the exit ramp without looking back. It was only when she reached the street, the rain hammering the windshield, the city moving around her with its usual chaotic indifference, that she realized her hands were trembling slightly on the wheel. Not from fear. She'd managed the fear in the garage, compressed it down to something manageable and functional while she needed it there. This was something else, something she couldn't name yet. She drove home telling herself it didn't matter. She'd handled it. She always handled it. Tomorrow she would have 6 pending cases on her desk, a brief due to the appellate court, and a client meeting at 9 who had a genuinely complicated drug trafficking situation and deserved her full attention. She stopped at a red light and stared at the rain. Because you told a man twice your weight that he was shaking, she pushed the thought away. The light changed. She drove. She did not sleep well that night. Not because of the parking garage. She'd been in worse situations, and her mind had a reasonably efficient system for processing threat and releasing it. She didn't sleep well because somewhere around midnight, lying in the dark of her apartment with the rain still coming down outside, she found herself thinking about the look on Lucian Draven's face when he'd watched his own men leave. The way the calm in his expression hadn't been the calm of someone who didn't feel anything. It had been the calm of someone who had learned, at significant cost, to stop letting what they felt destroy what they were trying to build. She recognized that kind of calm. She'd spent 12 years building it in herself. That recognition bothered her considerably more than the man with the scar and the shaking hands. She was back in the office at 7:45. By 9, she had the client meeting. By 11, she was on the phone with a federal court clerk about a filing deadline. By 1:30, she was eating the same sandwich she'd been eating 3 days a week for the past 8 months. Turkey, mustard, no cheese, from the deli on the ground floor of her building, and reading through a new case file that had arrived that morning without a referral name attached. Just a sealed envelope. Her name on the front, hand-printed. Delivered by a courier service that, when her paralegal called to confirm, had no record of the delivery. Inside the envelope were 43 pages. Printed. No letterhead, no identifying information on any page. She read the first page. Then she read it again. Then she closed her office door, told her assistant to hold her calls, and read all 43 pages straight through without stopping. By the time she finished, her turkey sandwich was untouched and cold, and something had shifted in her understanding of every case she had touched in the past 3 years. Not the clients, not the convictions, the pattern underneath them. She sat for a long moment looking at the closed door of her office. Somewhere in the city, in a building she had never been inside, Lucian Draven was presumably sitting in whatever kind of room a man like that sat in, knowing exactly what he'd just handed her, and why. The question she couldn't answer yet was whether he understood what she was going to do with it. She picked up her phone. She had a call to make. Not to Draven, not yet, not ever, if she could help it, but to a federal investigator she had worked with twice before, a woman named Brenda Castillo, who was meticulous and careful and deeply skeptical of anything that arrived in an unmarked envelope. Exactly the kind of skepticism this was going to require. Because if the 43 pages said what she thought they said, then the 3 federal convictions from yesterday's trial, the ones that had felt like a victory, the ones that had felt like the system doing what it was supposed to do, were just the surface, a distraction, maybe even a sacrifice. And whoever had designed that distraction had been doing it for a very long time. She dialed. The rain had stopped. Through her office window, the city spread out gray and dense under a sky that couldn't decide if it was clearing or gathering, and Serena Vale held the phone to her ear and waited for Brenda Castillo to pick up, and felt, for the first time in her 12 years of practice, like she might be standing at the edge of something much larger and much darker than anything she'd been trained to navigate. The phone rang once, twice. She looked at the 43 pages sitting on her desk. 3. Castillo, the voice said. Serena closed her eyes briefly. I need to see you, she said. Tonight, not at your office, somewhere neutral. She paused. Brenda, I think we've both been looking at the wrong people. Brenda Castillo was the kind of federal investigator who made other federal investigators nervous. Not because she was aggressive, she wasn't particularly, but because she listened with a quality of attention that made people feel like every word they said was being cataloged and cross-referenced against everything they'd ever said before. She had a habit of waiting 3 full seconds after someone finished speaking before she responded, and in those 3 seconds, most people filled the silence with something they hadn't meant to say. She was 51 years old, had been with the Bureau for 23 years, and she had a small scar on her left hand from a case she refused to discuss. She kept her hair short and her desk cleaner than any desk Serena had ever seen in a federal building, which Serena had always found either reassuring or slightly alarming depending on the context. She arrived at the neutral location, a back booth in a diner on West Addison that stayed open until 2 in the morning and whose owner had apparently decided that fluorescent lighting was a permanent aesthetic commitment at 8:47, 13 minutes after Serena. She slid into the booth without taking off her coat, looked at the 43 pages sitting on the table between them, and said nothing for a moment. "Who sent it?" she said finally. "No signature. Courier service with no record of the delivery." "But you know," Serena didn't answer that directly. "I know what it says." Brenda looked at the pages without touching them. "Walk me through it." "The Vega Street crew, the Holloway Park operation, the Meridian dock workers case from 2021. I've been inside all 3 prosecutions, different clients, different angles, different judges. But I kept running into the same structural problem." Serena turned the first page toward her. "Every time we got close to the financing, not the street-level money, the actual source capital, the evidence either disappeared or the witnesses stopped cooperating inside of 48 hours. "That happens," Brenda said. Flat. Not dismissive, just honest. 4 times in 3 years with the same pattern? Witnesses don't just stop cooperating. They stop cooperating when someone with access to protected information tells them exactly what cooperating will cost them. Serena tapped the second page. "These are wire transfer records, 12 accounts across 4 institutions. Every account was opened under shell companies incorporated in Delaware between 2017 and 2019. Brenda picked up the page. She read it slowly, then she read it again. "Where did these come from?" "They're in the envelope." "Serena." "I don't know the chain of custody, Brenda. I'm telling you what's on the page." Brenda set it down. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Not dramatically, just the look of someone doing rapid mental arithmetic. "If these are real, the account numbers are real. I checked 2 of them against public incorporation filings before I called you. The shells exist. They're dormant now, but they were active during the exact windows that correspond to all 3 cases." "That's not the same as proving—" "I know what it's not," Serena said. "I'm not standing in front of a jury. No, I'm sitting in a diner at 9 o'clock, telling you that someone handed me documentation suggesting that the money financing 3 separate criminal operations in this city all traces back to the same source. And that source has nothing to do with any of the people we've been prosecuting." Brenda was quiet for a moment. The diner made noise around them. A short-order cook working something on a flat top, 2 men at the counter arguing quietly about baseball, the sound of rain starting again against the front windows. "Who else have you shown this to?" "You're the first call I made." "Keep it that way." Brenda's voice changed register. Not louder, but harder. "Don't file anything. Don't reference this in any open case. Don't put it in your system. Not yet." "You believe it?" "I believe it's worth taking seriously," Brenda said carefully. "Which is a different statement." She looked at Serena directly. "You understand that if someone with institutional access has been covering these financing trails, and they know you have this—" "I understand what it means," Serena said. "Do you understand what it means tonight? Not abstractly, tonight." Serena looked at the 43 pages. She'd read them twice. She would read them a 3rd time tonight, and probably a 4th before morning. "It means I need to figure out how I received this before I can do anything with it," she said. "It means," Brenda said slowly, "that someone chose you specifically to receive it. And that's either because they trust your judgment or because they want to use your position to move it somewhere they can't move it themselves." She put her palms flat on the table. "Both of those things can be simultaneously true, and one of them gets you killed." The word landed in the booth like something physical. Serena didn't flinch, but she felt it. "I'll be careful," she said. "You were careful tonight, and you still ended up pinned against a column in a parking garage." Brenda said it without cruelty. Just the flat delivery of a woman who had spent 23 years looking at what happened to people who confused careful with safe. They sat for another 40 minutes. Brenda took photographs of every page with a personal phone. Not her bureau phone, she was explicit about that, and told Serena to keep the originals somewhere that wasn't her office or her apartment. Then she left without eating anything, which Serena had offered, and Brenda had declined with the efficiency of someone who had somewhere else to be that she wasn't going to mention. Serena sat alone in the booth for a few minutes after she left. The coffee was bad. She drank it anyway. She thought about the 43 pages. She thought about the account numbers, the shell companies, the dates. She thought about 3 years of cases and the specific texture of hitting a wall in evidence that she'd always told herself was just the nature of financial crime. The money always found a way to disappear before you could pin it. She had believed that. She had built her practice around working with that reality rather than against it. Now she was sitting in a diner wondering if that wall had been built by someone with a job title and an office in a building she walked past twice a week. She left a 20 on the table and walked out into the rain. She found out 4 days later that one of the witnesses from the Vega Street trial, a man named Carl Pitts, who had testified about a protection arrangement and then spent the post-trial period presumably going back to his life, had checked into Cook County Hospital with 2 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder. The official story, filed in a police report that Serena's paralegal dug out of the public records system, was that Pitts had been involved in a fight outside a bar in Pilsen. Carl Pitts didn't drink. Serena knew this because she'd spent 90 minutes with him before trial preparing his testimony, and he'd spent approximately 40 of those 90 minutes explaining to her that he'd been sober for 6 years and that being called as a witness in a federal case was threatening his recovery in ways he needed her to understand. She called the hospital. Pitts had been discharged. She called his last known address. No answer. She called the number he'd given her during witness prep. The number had been disconnected. She sat at her desk and looked at the wall. Then she called her paralegal, a 26-year-old named Dom Reyes, who was exhaustingly competent and had the useful quality of not asking questions he didn't need answered. The other witnesses from Vega, she said. All 6. Current contact information, current addresses, any incident reports from the last 72 hours. How fast? Yesterday. Give me 2 hours. It took him 90 minutes. 3 of the 6 witnesses were unreachable. 1 had moved, forwarding address to a sister in Milwaukee, which felt plausible. 2 simply weren't responding to any contact attempts. The 6th, a woman named Daria Holst, who had provided documentary evidence about the crew's extortion of local businesses, had filed a harassment report with the 4th District 2 days ago. The report described a vehicle that had been parked outside her home for 3 consecutive nights. The officer who took the report had advised her to call if the vehicle returned. The vehicle hadn't returned because it hadn't needed to. The message was already delivered. Serena read Dom's summary twice. Then she called Brenda Castillo. I need you to look at something else, she said. I'm in the middle of... Carl Pitts is in the hospital. 2 other witnesses are missing. Daria Holst filed a harassment report. Serena kept her voice level. Brenda, this started moving within 48 hours of the verdict. A pause. 3 seconds. Brenda's standard. Send me Holst's report number, she said. Don't contact any of the witnesses yourself. If this is what I think it might be, your involvement with them creates a trail that... I'm their attorney. You were their attorney. The case is closed. Serena. A shift in her voice. Not softer, but something adjacent to it. If the people responsible for the financing trail in those pages are also responsible for what's happening to those witnesses, then making contact with them puts you and them in the same visible location, which is exactly where you don't want to be right now. Serena sat with that for a moment. What am I supposed to do? She said. Not plaintively, just asking. Your actual job, Brenda said. Go to work, file your briefs, have your meetings, be exactly as visible and normal as you always are, and wait for me to come back to you. How long? As long as it takes to run the account numbers properly. The call ended. Serena set her phone down. She lasted approximately 4 hours being exactly as visible and normal as she always was before she did something she had told herself she absolutely wasn't going to do. She didn't have a number for Lucian Draven. Nobody had a number for Lucian Draven that they'd gotten through normal channels. What she had was the name of an attorney, a real estate lawyer named Porter Ashby, who had handled property transactions for several Draven-affiliated businesses over the years, and who showed up twice in the public records associated with the 43 pages. She wasn't calling Ashby. That was a line she didn't intend to cross. But she had spent the better part of a decade in courtrooms and conference rooms with people who worked adjacent to the Draven organization, and she knew, with the particular certainty that comes from years of paying attention to things people don't think you're paying attention to, that certain meetings happened at certain locations in the city with a regularity that was almost calendar-like in its consistency. She drove to one of those locations. It was a restaurant in River North, a quiet, expensive Italian place that had been in the same family for 30 years, and that had the quality of not caring whether you were famous or powerful or interesting, only whether you had a reservation. She didn't have a reservation. She also didn't intend to eat. She stood on the sidewalk across the street for 11 minutes. She felt deeply stupid doing it. She also felt it was necessary. At minute 12, a black car pulled up in front of the restaurant. Not one of the convoy SUVs from the parking garage. Something lower key, a dark sedan, the kind that moved through city traffic without drawing a second look. A man got out first, scanned the street in the mechanical way of someone who had been doing it long enough that it no longer required thought, and then opened the rear door. Lucian Draven stepped out. I was wearing a different suit from the parking garage, navy this time, with a tie that he'd loosened. And he looked like exactly what he would look like to someone who didn't know better. A successful man in his early 40s going to dinner at a restaurant he liked. His attention found her before she moved. She wasn't sure how. She was across the street, among other pedestrians, under an awning, but the scan of the street stopped at her position and stayed there. She crossed. The man who had gotten out first moved to intercept smoothly, without aggression but with a body position that made his intentions clear. Draven said something to him quietly. The man stepped back. "Attorney Vale," Draven said. His expression didn't register surprise. She didn't think surprise was something his face did much. "This is an unusual—" "I need 2 minutes," she said. "Not here. Not in the restaurant. Right here on the sidewalk." He looked at her for a moment. Something moving behind his eyes. Not calculation. Something older and quieter than that. 2 minutes, he said. "Carl Pitts is in the hospital. 2 witnesses from the Vega trial are unreachable. Someone is doing this within a week of convictions that your organization should have wanted. So I need to know right now whether this is coming from your people or whether you're as blind to it as I am." She had promised herself she would watch his face carefully when she said it. She watched his face carefully. What she saw was not the expression of a man who had ordered it. It was the expression of a man who was hearing something that confirmed a suspicion he'd been carrying and didn't want confirmed. "That's not me," he said. "That's not an answer I can verify." "No," he said. "It isn't." He looked past her briefly. Not paranoia, just awareness of the street, the people moving around them. "The envelope you received. I need you to tell me exactly what was in it." She went very still. "How do you know about the envelope?" "Because I didn't send it," he said. "And the fact that it reached you means someone inside my organization decided to move independently, which is a problem for both of us." The rain was starting again. Light, barely there, the kind that made the sidewalk dark without really being weather. "You don't know who sent it," she said. "I know who had access to the information that would be in it," he said, "which is a short list, and every name on that list is now a liability. To you. To you as well, counselor. Think about it." He said it without condescension, just the tone of someone stating a fact they wished were otherwise. Whoever sent you those pages did it because they wanted to use your credibility and your legal standing to move information that they can't move themselves. If the people trying to contain that information find out you have it before you can do something with it, "I know what happens," she said. "Then you know you don't have as much time as you think you do." She looked at him. The rain was picking up. Neither of them moved. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, she'd gotten good at distinguishing evasion from actual consideration, and this was the latter. "Because the people financing what you found in that envelope have been running my organization from underneath it for longer than you've been practicing law," he said. "And I've spent 4 years trying to find a way to prove that without ending up in a position that makes proof irrelevant." He paused. "You might be the first person outside of 2 or 3 I trust who has both the access and the standing to do something with it that doesn't get buried." "I'm not your instrument," she said immediately. "No," he agreed. "You're not." He met her eyes directly. Something in the meeting of it that didn't feel like strategy. "That's why it might actually work." She started to respond. Stopped. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Dom Reyes. Text message. 3 words. "Call me now." She looked up at Draven. "I have to take this." She stepped back 2 paces and called Dom. He answered on the first ring. "The 4th witness," he said without preamble. "The one I said moved to Milwaukee." "What about her?" "Her sister called the number we have on file looking for her. She hasn't arrived." His voice was careful in the way it got when he was managing his own reaction while delivering information. The sister says she left Chicago 3 days ago. She should have been there in 4 hours. Serena closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. She's missing, she said. That's what it sounds like. She ended the call. She turned back to Draven. I was watching her face. Someone's disappeared, he said. Not a question. A witness. She was working through the math in real time. 4 witnesses compromised in under a week, a document package that had come from inside his organization, and Brenda Castillo running account numbers somewhere in the federal system, while Serena stood on a sidewalk in the rain, talking to the man the whole city assumed was the problem. The problem wasn't him. Or rather, he wasn't only the problem. He was also something else. Something she didn't have a clean word for yet. I need names, she said. The short list. The people inside your organization who had access to the information in that envelope. That's not something I give to attorneys on sidewalks, he said. Then give me something I can use before someone else disappears. He looked at her for a long time. The rain was real now, properly falling, and neither of them had an umbrella, and neither of them moved. There's a man named Garrett Finch, he said finally. He runs logistics for 3 companies that are nominally independent but operationally connected to my organization. He's been doing it for 11 years. For the last 2, I've had reason to believe his loyalties are not exclusively to me. Where is he? That's the question, isn't it? Something tightened around his eyes. He hasn't reported in 4 days, which means he either sent you that envelope and ran, or he sent you that envelope and someone got to him before he could. The rain was soaking through her jacket now. She could feel it at her collar. Either way, she said slowly, someone knows that package is out there. Yes. And they know it came from inside your organization. Yes. Which means they're going to assume you know about it too. He said nothing, but the quality of his silence confirmed it. She thought about Brenda Castillo photographing 43 pages with a personal phone. She thought about Carl Pitts in a hospital bed. She thought about a woman who had left Chicago 3 days ago and never arrived. She thought about the 43 pages sitting in a lockbox in her car because she hadn't known where else to put them on a Thursday night when the world she understood had started rearranging itself without her permission. If Finch is gone, she said, then the only people who can explain the chain of custody on that documentation are you and whoever inside your organization helped him compile it. And you, Draven said, the attorney who received it without soliciting it, who took it to a federal investigator before she came to me, and who is now standing in the rain on a public street having a conversation that 3 cameras on this block are recording. She felt that land with a specific, sickening accuracy. She looked at the nearest intersection. She identified 2 cameras without trying hard. There were probably more. You knew about the cameras before you agreed to stand here, she said. Yes. You wanted this conversation on record. I wanted your presence here on record, he said. I've been recorded on this block before. That changes nothing for me. For you, an attorney who received an anonymous document package and then voluntarily sought out the man implicated in the relevant criminal network. It establishes something. It establishes that I'm investigating, she said. Her voice had gone flat. Not angry. Flatter than angry. Or it establishes that I'm compromised. Depending on who reviews the footage, he said, and who they work for. She stared at him. You just used me, she said. He held her gaze and didn't look away and didn't apologize and didn't pretend she was wrong. I gave you information you needed, he said. And yes, I did it in a location that protects me and complicates you, because the people we're both dealing with have resources. I can't match head on, and the one thing I have that they don't expect me to have is an attorney with a clean record who a federal investigator already trusts. He paused. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm asking you to understand that we've just passed the point where you can hand this back and walk away. The rain came down. She stood in it and understood that he was right. Not because he'd maneuvered her, although he had, and she was going to think about that at length later, alone, with something stronger than bad diner coffee. But because the woman on her witness list who had left Chicago 3 days ago and never arrived in Milwaukee had made it true before she'd ever gotten on that sidewalk. Carl Pitts's broken ribs had made it true. The disconnected phone number had made it true. She was already in it. She had been in it since she'd opened a sealed envelope on a Thursday afternoon and read, 43 pages that rearranged 3 years of her professional life into a pattern she couldn't unsee. "Garrett Finch," she said. "Yes. I need everything you know about him. Not a name. Everything." Draven reached into his jacket. He produced a card. Not a business card, just a plain white card with a number handwritten on it in blue ink. He held it out. She looked at it for a moment, then she took it. "This goes through my investigator," she said. "Not directly to you. I'm not your partner, and I'm not your instrument, and I am not compromising my bar license or my standing with the federal court for—" "Understood," he said, simply. No negotiation. She pocketed the card. She looked at him one final time in the rain, this man who had just confirmed that there was no clean version of the next several weeks of her life. That everything she'd built her reputation on, the idea that the system worked if you worked it correctly, that you could win within the rules, that the rules themselves weren't the problem, was going to be tested in ways she hadn't been prepared for when she'd walked out of courtroom 7 4 days ago feeling tired but victorious. "If you're using me," she said, "and I find out, and I will find out, I will burn everything, including whatever protection this conversation was supposed to give you." He looked at her with that expression she still didn't have a category for. "I know," he said. She turned and walked back to her car. She drove 2 blocks before she had to pull over. Not because she was falling apart. She wasn't. She sat in the parked car with the rain on the roof and her hands in her lap, and she made herself breathe at a pace that was slower than her body wanted, and she stayed there until her pulse settled to something reasonable. Then she picked up her phone and called Brenda Castillo for the second time in 4 days. "I have a name," she said when Brenda answered. "Garrett Finch. He's connected to the Draven organization, and I believe he's either the source of the documents I showed you or he knows who is. He's been missing for 4 days. Brenda was quiet for 3 seconds. "How did you get this name?" Serena looked through the rain-covered windshield at the street. "I'll explain when I see you," she said. "But Brenda, I need you to understand something before you pull that file." She paused. "I'm on camera with Draven tonight, River North, within the last 20 minutes. And I need you to hear my account of why before someone else's version reaches you." The silence on the other end lasted longer than 3 seconds this time. When Brenda spoke again, her voice had the carefully controlled quality of someone managing a reaction they would process privately. "My office," she said. 8 a.m. Bring everything." The call ended. Serena sat in the car. The rain didn't stop. She had told Draven she wasn't his instrument, and she had meant it, and she still meant it. But somewhere between a diner on West Addison and a sidewalk in River North, the ground under the case she thought she'd closed on Thursday afternoon had opened up into something without a visible bottom, and the 43 pages in her lockbox were no longer just evidence. They were the reason someone had already disappeared. They were the reason her witnesses were in hospitals and missing and afraid. And they were the reason that, for the first time since she had passed the bar exam 12 years ago and built a practice on the principle that the law was a structure you could trust. If you understood it well enough, Serena Vale was sitting alone in a parked car in the rain, genuinely uncertain whether the structure was going to hold. Brenda Castillo's office at 8 in the morning looked exactly the same as it looked at any other hour. The clean desk, the 2 chairs positioned at a precise angle to the desk, the single window with the blinds angled to let in light without letting anyone see in. The only thing different this morning was that Brenda was already standing when Serena arrived, which Brenda never did. She was a sit-down person. She processed information better sitting down, and she knew it, and she didn't apologize for it. She was standing. That was the first thing Serena noticed. The second thing she noticed was the man in the corner. He was in his mid-50s, heavy through the shoulders, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a paper coffee cup in his hand that he hadn't drunk from. He wore a gray suit that was expensive enough to be federal, but not expensive enough to be private sector. And he had the particular quality of stillness that came from years of being in rooms where other people were nervous and learning to use that contrast. "This is Assistant Special Agent in Charge Warren Holt," Brenda said. "He oversees the Organized Crime Division for the Chicago Field Office." Serena looked at Holt, then at Brenda. "I didn't know this was a group meeting," she said. "Sit down, Attorney Vale," Holt said, not unkindly, with the tone of someone who was used to people needing a moment to adjust. "I'll stand," she said, "until someone explains why you're here." Holt put the coffee cup on the windowsill. Because Agent Castillo brought me in after your call last night, and because the name Garrett Finch appears in an active federal investigation that predates your involvement by approximately 14 months. He let that sit. Which creates a jurisdictional situation we need to discuss. Serena felt something tighten in her chest. What kind of investigation? The kind I can't fully brief you on without knowing more about how you came into contact with the documents you described. He pulled out a chair, not his own, one of the visitor chairs, and set it slightly closer to the desk, changing the geometry of the room in a small way that Serena registered as deliberate. Walk me through the envelope. Everything. She did. She kept it precise. Time of receipt, delivery service, the process of reading it, her call to Brenda, the meeting at the diner. She left out the sidewalk conversation with Draven until the end, and when she got to it, she didn't dress it up. You made contact with Lucian Draven, Holt said. He was at a location I knew he frequented. I went to ask him directly whether the witness intimidation was coming from his organization. And he said it wasn't. He said the envelope came from inside his organization without his authorization. He gave me a name, Garrett Finch, and said Finch had been missing for 4 days. He gave you that name on a public street with active cameras. Yes. Holt looked at Brenda. Something passed between them that Serena couldn't read. What? She said. Brenda sat down. For the first time since Serena had walked in, she looked like herself, seated, hands flat, the listening expression engaged. But there was something underneath it, something that Brenda was managing with more effort than usual. The active investigation, Brenda said carefully. It's not into the Draven organization. Serena waited. It's into the prosecution of cases connected to the Draven organization, Brenda said. Specifically, the handling of evidence and witness management in federal cases prosecuted in this district over the last 4 years. The room was very quiet. Say that again, Serena said. Someone has been interfering with the federal prosecution of organized crime cases in Chicago, Holt said. Not to protect the criminals, to protect the people financing them. The interference takes the form of evidence management, documents that disappear from discovery, witnesses who receive information that should only be available to law enforcement. He looked at her steadily. We've been tracking it for 14 months. We have identified a pattern, but not a source. Until the documents I received. Until Garrett Finch's name came up last night, Holt said. Because Finch appears in our investigation, not as a target. He paused with the precision of a man who understood the weight of what he was about to say and wanted it to land correctly. As a source, Finch has been a confidential informant for this office for 8 months. The tightening in Serena's chest became something with sharper edges. He was feeding you information, she said slowly. He was attempting to build a case from the inside, giving us financial documentation, internal communications, names of people above the Draven organization who were using it as a buffer. Holt's voice stayed even. 3 weeks ago, Finch told his handler he was close to obtaining something definitive, something that would connect the shell companies to specific individuals with government and corporate positions. He picked up the coffee cup again, didn't drink from it. He missed his next check-in, and the one after that. He sent me the envelope instead of coming to you, Serena said. It appears so. Why? Brenda and Holt exchanged the look again. That, Brenda said, is what worries us. Serena pulled out the chair and sat down, not because she felt calmer, because her legs needed a moment that she wasn't going to give them standing up. He didn't trust you, she said. He didn't trust someone, Holt said. Whether that's this office, this building, or a specific person inside either, we don't know. What we know is that he had a functioning channel to his handler and he didn't use it. He used a courier service and a sealed envelope, and he sent it to a defense attorney he'd never met. Why me specifically? Your record, Brenda said simply. 4 convictions in cases connected to the Draven organization. Clean process every time. No evidence suppression, no procedural shortcuts. You've been the one attorney in this space who's been impossible to approach because your cases don't have the kind of gaps that the interference pattern typically exploits. She paused. Finch may have concluded that you were the one person working these cases who hadn't been touched. Serena sat with that. Or, Holt said, he concluded that giving the documents to a defense attorney created a legal protection that a federal informant couldn't establish on his own. Attorney-client privilege doesn't apply here, but the chain of custody does. Documents in the possession of a member of the bar, obtained without solicitation, are harder to make disappear than documents in a federal evidence locker, Serena finished. We've had materials go missing from secured evidence storage, Holt said flatly, 3 times in the last 14 months, which is why I am standing in this office instead of having this conversation in a building with my name on the door. The implications of that assembled themselves in Serena's mind with a mechanical clarity that felt almost detached from the reality of sitting in a federal agent's borrowed office at 8 in the morning, being told that the evidence system she had trusted her entire career had a leak she couldn't locate. "Someone inside your office," she said. "We don't know that," Holt said, with slightly more emphasis than the words required. "You're meeting me here instead of at your office because you don't know who to trust inside it," she said. "That's what this room is. That's why Brenda brought you in personally instead of filing a report." Holt looked at her without answering. That was his answer. She thought about Brenda's voice on the phone last night, "My office, 8 a.m." And she thought about how Brenda had said "my office" and then brought Serena to a conference room that wasn't Brenda's office, wasn't even on Brenda's floor. She thought about the personal phone Brenda had used to photograph the 43 pages. "How long have you known?" she asked Brenda. "Known is too strong a word," Brenda said. "Suspected, 4 months. And you didn't tell me." "I didn't know you were going to walk into my diner with 43 pages from a missing informant," Brenda said. Her voice was careful, but not apologetic. "I was managing something I couldn't verify. I couldn't—" "Brenda." Serena's voice cut through without rising. "I've been trying cases in this space for 3 years. If you had reason to believe the evidence chain was compromised." "I had reason to believe something was wrong," Brenda said. "I did not have reason to tell a defense attorney that the federal prosecution apparatus might be leaking, because that information, in the wrong hands or at the wrong moment, blows 14 months of work and potentially gets Finch killed." She held Serena's gaze. "We may have failed on that second part regardless." The room absorbed that. Serena looked at the desk. There was a manila folder on it that hadn't been there when she first sat down. Holt had placed it there sometime in the last few minutes with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew where it needed to be before the conversation reached the point that it did. "Open it," Holt said. She opened it. 3 photographs. Surveillance quality, time-stamped. The grain of cameras that prioritized coverage over resolution. The first showed a man she didn't recognize entering a building she did. The federal courthouse on South Dearborn, staff entrance, side door. The timestamp was 11 days ago. The second photograph showed the same man at a different location. A parking structure. Not the one from last week. A different one. Lincoln Park area. I was handing something to another man. An envelope. The timestamp was 9 days ago. The third photograph showed the same man at what appeared to be a restaurant table, across from a woman whose face was partially obscured by the camera angle. The partial profile was enough. Serena's mouth went dry. "That's Judge Marilyn Cates," she said. "Yes," Holt said. Judge Marilyn Cates had presided over 2 of the 4 Draven-adjacent cases Serena had won. She had been on the federal bench for 19 years. She had a reputation for procedural rigor that bordered on merciless. Attorneys in this district had a saying about appearing in her courtroom. Prepare like she's already read everything you haven't. Serena had respected her, had actually genuinely respected her, in the way you respected someone whose standards forced you to be better at your job. "What is this?" she said. Her voice was very flat. "The man in this photograph is a financial consultant named Reed Carver," Holt said. "He appears in your 43 pages. He's associated with 2 of the shell companies in the Delaware Incorporation filings." He's giving her an envelope. "We don't know what's in it." "You have a photograph of a federal judge receiving something from a man connected to the shell companies. In a case you've been investigating for 14 months, and you don't know what's in it." "We know what we can prove," Holt said, which is not the same thing. Serena set the photograph down. She pressed her fingertips against the table for a moment. Then she picked it back up and looked at it again because she needed to be completely certain she was seeing what she was seeing and not what stress and sleeplessness and 4 days of compounding revelations were making her see. It was Judge Cates. The jawline, the cut of the jacket, the particular way the woman held her shoulders. "The Vega Street trial," Serena said. "Judge Harmon presided. Cates wasn't involved." "No," Holt said. But the Holloway Park case, 2022. She ruled on the evidence suppression motion. Yes. The motion I lost, Serena said. The only case in this space I've lost. Cates ruled to suppress the financial transfer documentation that would have... She stopped. The documentation that would have connected the Holloway Park operation to the same shell company network that's in these 43 pages. Brenda said nothing. Holt said nothing. The silence did all the work. Serena stood up. She wasn't conscious of deciding to stand. Her body made the decision independently, the way it sometimes did when sitting became physically incompatible with what her mind was processing. She walked to the window. The blinds were angled to prevent visibility from outside, and she was grateful for it because she needed something to look at. That wasn't the photograph or the two people who had been sitting on this information while she had been walking into courtrooms and trusting the system to do what she had spent 12 years believing it did. She's been protecting them, Serena said. We don't know the full extent. She suppressed the one piece of evidence that would have unraveled the whole financing network in 2022. Serena turned back from the window. How long? We believe her involvement began approximately 6 years ago, Holt said. Prior to that, her record is clean. 6 years. Serena heard her own voice from a slight distance, the way you hear your voice when you're managing something that would otherwise change the volume. I clerked for a judge in this district. I built my entire practice around the belief that the federal bench in Chicago was the last line that held. She looked at Holt. 6 years ago, I was 2 years into practice, and I was telling clients that the system was harder to corrupt than they thought. The system is harder to corrupt than most people think, Holt said. One judge does not. One judge with a connection to the shell companies that fund the criminal network I've been fighting for 3 years, Serena said. One judge who has ruled on evidence in cases that directly affected witness safety and prosecution success. One judge who apparently has a relationship with a man who may know where Garrett Finch is and whether he is still alive. She stopped, breathed. Don't tell me what one judge does or doesn't mean. Holt accepted that. He didn't push back. We need the original documents, he said. The 43 pages. I need to think about the chain of custody before I hand originals to an office with a leak you can't identify. Attorney Vail, I said I need to think about it. Not a dismissal. A statement of fact delivered at a volume that made the distinction unnecessary to explain. Holt looked at Brenda. Brenda looked at Serena. Take 24 hours, Brenda said. But Serena, whatever you decide about the documents, do not contact Draven again. And do not reach out to anyone connected to Judge Cates's court. If she's monitoring her exposure and your name shows up anywhere near this, I understand. Do you? Because 24 hours ago you went to find Draven on a public street, which I told you not to do, and now you're on camera with him in a way that someone who wanted to discredit you could use. I know. So when I say do not make contact, I know, Brenda. Serena picked up her bag. I'll be in touch by tomorrow morning. She left. She walked down 3 flights of stairs instead of taking the elevator, because the elevator required standing still, and standing still was not something her body was going to cooperate with for the next few minutes. She pushed out through a side door into an alley behind the building and stood in the cold morning air and pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth. Not crying. She wasn't going to cry. But there was a physical response happening that she needed to get ahead of. Something between nausea and the particular vertigo that comes when the ground you've been standing on reveals that it was never solid. 6 years. Judge Cates had been on the bench for 19. Serena had been practicing for 12, which meant that for the first 6 years of her career, when she had been learning the system, internalizing how it worked, building her understanding of what made a case hold or collapse, for all of that time, one of the judges she had studied and emulated and used as a benchmark for professional standards had already been compromised. She had built a philosophy on a foundation with a crack in it she'd never been able to see. She stood in the alley until her breathing was normal. Then she walked to her car. She didn't go back to her office. She drove to the parking garage where she kept the documents in her lockbox, a municipal structure 6 blocks from her office, anonymous, high traffic. And she sat in the car with the 43 pages on the passenger seat, and she read them a 3rd time, slowly. Looking now not for the pattern she'd first identified, but for anything that touched the Holloway Park case specifically. Anything that would place Reed Carver, or anyone connected to the shell companies, in proximity to the evidentiary decisions that Kate's had made in 2022. On page 31, she found it. A transfer record. $11,000 moved from one of the Delaware shells to an account she didn't recognize, dated 3 weeks before the Holloway Park evidence suppression ruling. The receiving account was numbered, no name attached. $11,000 was not a bribe for a federal judge. It was too small for that. But it was exactly the right size to be a payment to someone who had passed information to a judge, a clerk, a paralegal, someone with access to pending motions before they became public. She photographed the page with her phone. Then she photographed all 43 pages individually and sent the files to a cloud account she had set up 2 years ago for a case involving digital evidence and never used for anything else since. The account was not connected to her name, her firm, or any email address associated with her professional identity. She had set it up out of the methodical habit of someone who had learned to create contingencies before she needed them. She was grateful for that habit now, in a way that felt almost violent. She put the pages back in the lockbox. She locked it. She drove. Her phone rang at 11:47. Unknown number. She let it ring. It rang again 30 seconds later. Same number. She pulled over and answered. "You need to stop." Male voice. Not young. Late 40s, she estimated, with the quality of controlled tension that came from someone managing fear by flattening it. "Whatever you're doing with the documents, you need to stop today." Who is this? Someone who doesn't want to see you hurt. A pause. "You were at a meeting this morning in a building on South Clark. You went in a side entrance. You left through an alley." She had been watched. The surveillance had started at the building, which meant it had either been in place before she arrived, which meant they knew about her meeting with Holt, or it had been triggered by someone inside that building making a call. "What do you want?" she said. "I want you to understand that the people who want those documents back are not going to ask politely." The voice was steady, but the steadiness had a cost she could hear underneath it. "They already know you made copies. They know you met with Castillo twice, and they know you talked to Draven." Who are they? People who have been running this city from behind institutions you trust. People who have more patience than you do and more resources and less to lose. A breath on the line. "I'm telling you this because you have maybe 48 hours before this moves to a phase where I can't help you." "You haven't helped me with anything yet," she said. "You've told me I'm in danger and given me no actionable information. That's not help. That's a threat with extra steps." Silence. "Garrett Finch," she said. "Is he alive?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. "I don't know," the voice said, and for the first time the controlled quality broke slightly. Not into emotion, but into something that sounded like honest uncertainty. "I genuinely don't know." "Then you're not close enough to them to be useful to me," she said. "And if you're not useful to me, I have no reason to do what you're asking." The line went dead. She sat in the parked car and worked through the implications with the systematic speed of someone who had spent 12 years turning information into argument. The call told her several things simultaneously. She was being watched, which she had suspected. The people watching her were not yet moving to direct action, which meant they were still in the phase of trying to contain the situation through pressure. And there was at least one person adjacent to the operation who was uncomfortable enough with what was happening to make an anonymous call that served no clear strategic purpose for their side. That last piece mattered. Discomfort in a closed network was a crack. She needed to find the crack before the network found her. She called Brenda. Brenda picked up immediately. I just received a call from an unknown number," Serena said. Male voice, late 40s, monitored the meeting this morning. "Brenda. Whoever is watching me knew I was at that building. Either they have surveillance infrastructure in place around locations associated with your work, or someone inside your building. Don't say it on the phone. We need to move faster than 24 hours. "I know." Brenda's voice was taut. "Holt is running the account number from page 31. He called me 20 minutes ago." "I found it too," Serena said. "The pre-ruling transfer." "There's something else," Brenda said. Then she stopped. The stop was not a hesitation. It was a choice. Serena could feel the quality of it. The moment someone decides whether to put information into the world that changes everything it touches. "Tell me," Serena said. "The receiving account for that transfer," Brenda said. "Holt ran it. It's registered to a law firm." "Which one?" Another pause. "Serena," Brenda said slowly. It's registered to an account associated with your firm. The world went very quiet. What? She said. Not your personal account. Not a trust account. An operating account for Vale Legal Group. Brenda's voice was careful and terrible. It received a single transfer of $11,000 31 days ago and has not been touched since. Serena stopped breathing for a moment. She started again deliberately. That's not possible, she said. I have access to every account associated with my firm. I review statements personally. There is no... It's a secondary operating account opened 14 months ago, Brenda said. It's registered under your firm's tax ID. The signatory listed on the documentation is your name. I didn't open a secondary operating account. I know that, Brenda said. Serena, I believe you. But Holt is looking at documentation that has your name on it and a transfer from the shell company connected to the conspiracy you've been investigating. A breath. You have to understand what this looks like. She understood exactly what it looked like. It looked like she had been paid. It looked like the attorney who had spent 3 years fighting organized crime cases in this city had a financial connection to the network financing those crimes. It looked like everything she had built, everything she had protected and fought for and refused to compromise under threat, in a parking garage and in courtrooms, and in 12 years of late nights. It looked like all of it was a performance for a woman who had known exactly where the money was going. Someone set me up, she said. That is one interpretation, Brenda said carefully. Brenda. Her voice had dropped to something she didn't use very often. If you are sitting on the possibility that I could be... I'm not, Brenda said. But I'm telling you that Holt has to follow this, and when he follows it, your name is going to come up in an active federal investigation as a potential person of interest, and I cannot control what happens when it does. When does that happen? He was filing preliminary inquiry paperwork when I left him 40 minutes ago. Which means I have hours, Brenda said. Maybe less. Serena looked through the windshield. The street was ordinary. Cars, people, the city moving at its usual afternoon pace, with complete indifference to the fact that everything she had worked for was in the process of being dismantled by people she had never met, using her own name as the instrument of destruction. Whoever did this, she said, opened an account in my name, received a transfer from the conspiracy's network, and timed it to surface at precisely the moment the 43 pages became active in a federal investigation. Yes. They were prepared for the documents to surface. They had a countermove already in place before Finch sent them to me. That's what it suggests. Which means they've known about Finch longer than 4 days, she said. They've been preparing this for at least 14 months. They built the account the same month Finch became your informant. The line was quiet. They have someone close to your operation, Brenda, she said. Not adjacent, close. Someone who knew Finch's timeline and built a response to it that included destroying me if the documents ever became a legal problem. She pressed her hand flat on the steering wheel. And right now, that response is working. Serena, I need an hour, she said. Do not let Holt file anything for 1 hour. I can't. 1 hour, she said. Because if he files and my name surfaces as a person of interest before I can establish the chain on this account, the people who built it win. The documents become tainted. The investigation becomes about me. And whoever is inside your operation walks away clean. She paused. 1 hour, Brenda. That's what I'm asking. The silence lasted 7 seconds. 1 hour, Brenda said. After that, I can't hold it. The call ended. Serena started the car. She drove without a clear destination for approximately 90 seconds. While her mind sorted through every available option with the speed and brutality of someone for whom the luxury of time had just been removed. She had 1 hour. She had copies of the documents in a cloud account. She had a handwritten number on a plain white card in her jacket pocket that she had told herself she would not use except as an absolute last resort. She pulled the card out. She looked at it. She thought about Brenda's voice saying hours, maybe less. She thought about a federal account with her name on it and $11,000 sitting in it like a loaded weapon pointed at everything she'd built. She thought about Garrett Finch, who had looked at a functional channel to the people who were supposed to protect him, and decided, for reasons she now understood completely, that the channel couldn't be trusted. She dialed the number. It rang once. I wondered how long it would take, Lucian Draven said. I need to meet, she said. Now. Not a public location, not a restaurant. Somewhere that isn't on camera. A beat of silence. Are you being followed? She checked her mirrors. I don't know. Drive to the Lakeshore Storage Facility on East Illinois, he said. Unit 7C. The code is 4499. Go in and wait. How do I know? You don't, he said. That's the situation you're in. He was right. That was exactly the situation she was in. She drove. The storage facility on East Illinois was the kind of place that existed in every major city without anyone thinking about it. Rows of corrugated metal doors, fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency just below conscious irritation, the smell of concrete dust and old cardboard. Unit 7C was in the back corner of the third corridor. The code worked. The door rolled up on a space roughly the size of a large bathroom, empty except for 2 folding chairs and a portable LED lantern sitting on the floor that was already on. Draven was not there yet. Serena went in, pulled the door down behind her, and stood in the humming light with her back against the wall and her phone in her hand showing 41 minutes remaining on the hour she'd asked Brenda for. She had driven in a pattern for the last 12 minutes. 3 unnecessary turns, 2 double-backs, a loop through a parking garage, and she was as confident as she could be without professional counter-surveillance training that she hadn't been followed, which wasn't the same as certain. She was aware of the gap between those 2 things in a way she had never been before today. Her hands were steady. She was mildly surprised by that. The door rolled up 8 minutes later. Draven came in alone, which she hadn't expected, and pulled the door back down behind him with the practiced efficiency of someone who had used spaces like this before. He was wearing a dark jacket over a gray shirt, no tie, and he had the look of someone who had been doing something else when her call came and had come directly from it, a quality of interrupted focus that hadn't fully resolved. He looked at her face and didn't say anything for a moment. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it. The photographs of Reed Carver and Judge Cates, the transfer on page 31, the secondary operating account in her firm's name with her forged signature, the anonymous call, Brenda's timeline. She told it in the order it had happened without editorializing, and she watched his face as she did. He listened the way he did everything, without interruption, without the small reactive sounds most people made while receiving information. Just attention, total and unnerving. When she finished, he was quiet for approximately 5 seconds. They built the account 14 months ago, he said. The same month Finch became your operations informant for Holt's office, she said. Which means they knew about Finch from the beginning, he said. His voice was level, but underneath the level there was something she was beginning to recognize. Not anger, but the cold compression of it. Someone told them. Someone inside Holt's operation or close to it. Or someone inside mine. His jaw tightened fractionally. I told 2 people about Finch's arrangement. 2. People I have worked with for a decade. Can you reach them right now? He was already pulling out his phone. He dialed. Waited. His expression shifted in a way that was small and terrible. He dialed again. Different number. Same result. He put the phone in his pocket. One of them isn't answering, he said. Which one? A man named Callum Reese. He's been with my organization for 11 years. He manages internal security. Who knows what? Who goes where? His voice was carefully empty in the way that emptiness costs something. If Reese is the connection, then everything Finch knew about our operation, everything Finch passed to federal investigators, went straight back to the people Finch was trying to expose. Finch knew that, Serena said. That's why he didn't use his federal channel. He knew the channel was compromised. He knew something was wrong. He didn't know where the breach was. Draven looked at the lantern on the floor for a moment. He took what he had, and he aimed it at the one target that wasn't inside any of the systems he'd watched get corrupted. Me, she said. You. She looked at her phone. 33 minutes. I need something from you, she said. Not information. Action. What kind? Callum Reese. If he's the connection to the people running this, he knows where the financing trail leads at the top. Not the shell companies, the actual people. Names, positions, something that can't be explained away as circumstantial. She met his eyes directly. Can you find him in the next 30 minutes? I can find him, Draven said. Whether he talks is a different question. Then find him and ask the question. Something moved in his expression. You understand what you're asking. I'm asking you to locate and question someone who may have betrayed both of us, and caused the disappearance of at least one person, she said. I'm not asking you to do it gently. I'm asking you to do it fast and to give me whatever he gives you in a form I can use in a federal proceeding. Information obtained through, I didn't ask how you get it, she said. I said, give me something I can use. You know the difference. You've been operating in the space between law and evidence for years. Find the version that holds up. She paused. Can you do that? He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. 25 minutes, she said. He made 3 calls in rapid succession, standing in the corner of the storage unit with his back half turned, his voice low enough that she caught the tone but not the words. She didn't try to hear them. She spent the time reviewing the photographs she'd taken of the 43 pages on her phone, looking again at the transfer record, mapping in her mind the chain she would need to construct for it to mean something in a courtroom rather than just in a storage unit at 11 in the morning. The third call was shorter than the others. When he ended it, he turned back. Reese is at a property in Bridgeport, he said, a house connected to one of my logistics companies. He went there this morning. His voice had gone to a place she didn't want to examine too closely. He didn't tell anyone he was going. That's not where he's supposed to be. No. Can your people get to him before they're already moving? He looked at her. Come with me. She blinked. What? If Reese talks and gives me something that needs to go directly into your hands from his mouth, with you present as a witness, that changes what it becomes legally. He said it plainly, without urgency, which made it more urgent somehow. Your presence turns a conversation into a statement. My presence in a house in Bridgeport with members of your organization questioning a witness. Your presence as an attorney witnessing a voluntary statement made by an individual who chooses to provide information. He said it with a precision that told her he had thought about this faster than she would have thought possible. You don't touch anything. You don't participate. You observe and document. That is an extraordinarily thin legal distinction. Yes, he said. It is. She looked at the phone. 22 minutes. She thought about the account with her name on it. She thought about Holt's preliminary inquiry paperwork. She thought about Brenda's voice saying hours, maybe less, and the particular quality of that less, the way it hadn't been a figure of speech. Let's go, she said. The house in Bridgeport was a 2-story brick building on a block of similar houses, unremarkable in every external detail. The kind of street that generated no particular attention from anyone. When they arrived, Draven driving, Serena in the passenger seat, neither of them speaking much in the 12 minutes it took to get there. 2 men were already outside, positioned with the casual body language of people who were making themselves look like they belonged while making absolutely certain no one left. Inside was different from outside. The front room had been a sitting room at some point. Now it was a room with the furniture pushed to the walls and a man seated in a straight-back chair in the center with his wrists zip-tied to the armrests. He was mid-50s, broad, with the thick hands of someone who had done physical work at some point in their life, and the pale, sweating face of someone who had spent the last 20 minutes understanding their situation with full clarity. Callum Reese looked at Draven when he walked in, and something in his expression tried to assemble itself into dignity and failed. Lucy Yen, he started. Don't, Draven said, quietly. He pulled a chair from the wall and set it directly in front of Reese and sat in it with his elbows on his knees and his face approximately 3 feet from Reese's. The proximity was deliberate, not aggressive, which would have been easier to manage, but intimate in the way of a conversation between 2 people who have known each other a long time and where one of them is about to learn exactly what that time was worth. Serena stayed near the door. She didn't take out her phone yet. She watched. The account, Draven said. The one in Vale Legal Group's name. You set it up. Reese's jaw worked. I don't know what you're... Callum. Still quiet, still close. I have known you for 11 years. I know what it looks like when you're buying time, and I know what it looks like when you actually don't know something. This is the first one. A pause. Who told you to set it up? I want... Reese's voice cracked. He steadied it. I want to talk to someone about... There's no one else to talk to right now, Draven said. There's just this room and the next few minutes and what you decide to do with them. He leaned back slightly. I'm not going to hurt you, Callum. I want you to understand that. I'm going to sit here until you decide to tell me the truth, but I'm not going to hurt you. That's not who I am, and you know it. Reese looked at him. The sweating was visible now, at his temples, along his collar. "They'll kill me," Reese said, low, nearly a whisper. "They'll try to kill you regardless of what you say in the next 5 minutes," Draven said. "You went to a property this morning that you weren't scheduled to visit, and you didn't tell anyone you were going, which means you came here because you were running from something, which means they've already decided you're a liability." He held Reese's gaze. "The people in this room are the only people right now who have any reason to keep you alive." Reese closed his eyes. He opened them. He looked at Serena for the first time. "Who is she?" he said. "My attorney," Draven said. Serena kept her face neutral. "She's a witness," Draven said. "Whatever you say, she hears it. It goes somewhere that isn't these 4 walls." He let that land. "That's protection, Callum. Actual protection." Reese looked at the floor. His breathing was the sound of a man doing math he didn't like the answer to. "Senator Daniel Voss," he said. The room was very still. "Say it again," Draven said. "Daniel Voss." Reese's voice had changed register, not louder, but more solid, as if saying the name had committed him to something, and the commitment was a kind of relief. "He's been running the financing network since 2018. The shell companies, the judiciary contacts, the evidence management, all of it runs through 2 corporate intermediaries that Voss controls through proxy ownership." He looked up. "He's been using the syndicates in this city as operational cover. Every time a prosecution got close to the financing, Voss's people redirected it at street level, made it look like the crime stopped at the gang level." A breath. "He had 3 judges. Kate's was one. The other 2, names," Draven said. Reese gave them. Serena's phone was recording. It had been recording since she'd pressed the button in the car 90 seconds before they'd walked in. A decision she'd made and not announced, which was the kind of decision that 12 years of working the line between what was legal and what was necessary had prepared her to make and to live with. 2 more names. Both federal bench, both with years of spotless records behind them. "The account in my name," Serena said. She said it from the door, steady and direct. "Who specifically opened it?" Reese turned to look at her. He seemed slightly startled that she'd spoken, as if he'd processed her as furniture and the furniture had asked a question. "Reese," Draven said, "answer her." "A woman named Theo Marchetti," Reese said. "She's Voss's financial operations manager. She handles the shell accounts. When Finch started getting close to the documentation, Voss ordered a contingency, something that would destroy the credibility of whoever received it." His eyes moved back to Serena. "They picked you because you were the only attorney working this space who wasn't already compromised, which made you the most dangerous person to them and the most useful person to destroy." Serena absorbed that. "Garrett Finch," she said. "Where is he?" Reese's face shifted. Something went through it that was not calculation. "I don't know for certain," he said. "But 4 days ago, Marchetti's team identified his location. I was told he was going to be handled. He said the last word the way people said words they were using as a container for something they didn't want to name directly." "I don't know if he's alive," she said. "Is he alive?" "I don't know," Reese said. "I swear to you I don't know." She looked at Draven. Draven looked at her. She had 12 minutes left on her hour. "I need to make a call," she said. She stepped outside. The 2 men near the door shifted slightly, and she walked past them to the edge of the front step and dialed Brenda. "I have a recorded statement," she said, the moment Brenda picked up. "Voluntary, witnessed, names the primary architect of the entire network. I need you to hear it before Holt files anything." Silence. 3 seconds. "How did you Senator Daniel Voss," she said. The 3 seconds this time were different. The quality of the silence changed entirely. "Serena," Brenda said, very carefully. "Where are you right now?" "Bridgeport. I'll send you the address. I need you here in the next 15 minutes before this window closes. I need to bring—" "Come alone," Serena said. "I'm serious. Whoever you bring, clear them yourself. Don't call anyone from your office. Don't use your building's communication system." She paused. "Voss has contacts on the federal bench. We don't know how far the network goes. Come alone and come now." She ended the call before Brenda could argue. She went back inside. Draven was still in the chair across from Reese. He looked up when she came in. Brenda Castillo is coming, she said. 15 minutes. She needs to hear his statement directly. Draven nodded once. Serena looked at Reese. You're going to tell her exactly what you told us. Everything. Names, amounts, dates, anything else you have. And then what happens to me, Reese said. I don't make promises I can't enforce, she said. But I can tell you that a voluntary statement to a federal investigator puts you in a different position than where you were an hour ago. Reese absorbed that, nodded slowly. Serena checked her phone. 9 minutes on the hour. She was going to make it. Barely, with no margin and no room for anything to go sideways. But she was going to make it. Then her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. 3 words. Stop. Or Finch. Her throat tightened. She showed it to Draven without saying anything. He read it. Something shifted behind his eyes, quick, decisive, the look of a man moving from one state to another without the luxury of transition. They're watching this location, he said, or watching my phone. Both, probably. He stood up. He crossed to the window and looked out through the edge of the curtain without touching it, the way someone looked out a window when they needed to see without being seen. He was still for a moment. Then, there's a white SUV at the end of the block. It wasn't there when we arrived. Serena looked at the text again. Stop or Finch. Finch was still alive. If he was still alive, they were still using him, which meant this was pressure, not a statement of fact. They were trying to stop her from delivering the recording to Castillo before the hour closed, and Holt filed. She had 9 minutes. How many people do you have outside? She asked Draven. 2 on the front. Back? 1. The white SUV, she said. How many people can it carry? He looked at her. Why? Because I need Brenda Castillo to get to this address, she said. And I need whatever is in that SUV occupied long enough for her to do that. Occupied, he repeated. You know what I mean. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she had come to recognize as the one he used when she said something that recalibrated his understanding of her. I need to make a call, he said. While he made it, Serena went back to Reese. You have about 8 minutes to decide whether you're doing this, she said. After that, the window closes and whatever deal was available to you becomes significantly harder to access. Reese looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. He'll come after my family, he said. Voss, if I testify. If you don't testify, Voss already has everything he needs and your family is no safer than they are right now, she said. The only version of this where your family has any protection is the version where Voss is the one being investigated instead of you. It was not gentle. She didn't have time for gentle. Reese closed his eyes again. Okay, he said. Okay. Draven ended his call. He looked at Serena. My people will handle the SUV. Castillo gets a clear path for approximately 10 minutes. That's enough. And after Castillo gets here and gets the statement, he said, after that, the recording goes to multiple secure locations simultaneously, she said. The cloud account, Brenda's personal phone, and a media contact I've had for 2 years, who has been trying to get me to talk about organized crime in this city and who I've told no every single time. She looked at him. The moment it goes to the media contact, it becomes unstoppable. They can't suppress what's already been sent. That exposes everything, he said. Yes. Including my organization. Yes, she said. That was always going to be part of this. You know that. He looked at her. And there it was again. That expression she didn't have a category for, the one that appeared in specific moments and refused to be simple. I know, he said. 4 minutes later, Brenda Castillo walked through the front door of the house in Bridgeport with her coat wet from the light rain that had started again, and her jaw set in the particular way it went when she had driven somewhere without entirely knowing what she was driving toward. She stopped when she saw the room. Draven. Reese in the chair. Serena near the door. Her eyes took it in with the speed of 23 years of professional processing. She looked at Serena. Tell me you have something I can use, she said. I have a recording and a live witness, Serena said, and we have about 3 minutes before someone outside this building decides to move. Brenda looked at Reese. Senator Daniel Voss, Serena said. Something crossed Brenda's face that Serena had never seen there before in 2 years of working together. Not shock exactly, but the expression of someone who had been looking for the answer to a question in one direction and just been told it was behind them. Start from the beginning, Brenda said to Reese. She pulled out her phone, personal, not bureau, and hit record. Don't leave anything out, Reese started talking. Outside, somewhere at the end of the block, there was a sound. Not loud, nothing like what movies suggested, just a sharp crack and then the noise of an engine accelerating away faster than the street required. One of Draven's people appeared briefly in the doorway, said 2 words in Draven's direction, and disappeared again. Draven looked at Serena. She looked back. The recording was running. Reese was talking. Brenda was listening with the focused stillness of a woman who had spent 23 years waiting for exactly this kind of statement from exactly this kind of person. The hour was up. Whatever Holt had filed in the last 60 seconds, it was going to collide with what was happening in this room, and the collision was going to be messy and complicated and would require several conversations that Serena was not looking forward to. She looked at the text on her phone again. Stop. Or Finch. Finch. The man who had looked at a broken chain of trust and found the one link he thought might hold. A defense attorney with a clean record and a habit of building contingencies, and aimed everything he had at it. Finch, who was somewhere in this city, alive or not, and who had set this entire chain of events into motion by putting 43 pages in a sealed envelope and trusting someone he'd never met. She was going to find him. After Reese finished his statement, and Brenda secured the recording, and they got out of this house, and she got in front of Holt before Holt got in front of a grand jury. After all of that, she was going to find Garrett Finch. Reese was mid-sentence when the front window exploded inward. Not glass. The window didn't break. It was the frame itself, buckled inward by the impact of something that hit the exterior wall with a force that sent a crack running from the window to the ceiling in under a second. Plaster dust. Brenda dropping automatically to a crouch. Draven on his feet and moving toward the door in the same instant, one of his people already inside, already pulling Reese's chair back from the center of the room. Someone outside had just hit the front of the building with a vehicle. Back, Draven said. One word, sharp. Serena grabbed Brenda's arm and moved. The back of the house was a narrow kitchen with a door that opened onto a concrete yard. They hit the yard at the same time as 2 of Draven's people came around the side of the building from opposite directions. And for exactly 3 seconds, there was the kind of chaotic, overlapping noise and motion that made it impossible to track anything except the most immediate thing, which was the door in the back fence, and Brenda's hand pulling it open and the alley beyond it. They ran. Serena had not run anywhere, not really run, not sprint and don't look back run, in years. Her body registered the surprise of it in her lungs and her calves, and the impact of the alley's uneven surface through the soles of shoes that had been designed for courthouse corridors. She ran anyway. Behind her, voices. Not close. Not yet. Brenda ran alongside her, and Serena registered with a distant part of her mind that Brenda ran with the form of someone who had trained for exactly this and not recently enough. Slightly favoring the left, keeping up regardless. The alley opened onto a side street. A car, one of Draven's, she understood without being told, was already there, engine running, the rear door open. She went in first, Brenda second. The door closed. The car moved. Draven was in the front passenger seat. He turned to look at them. Reese, Serena said. With 2 of my people, he said, separate vehicle. Brenda's recording is on my phone in the cloud account you set up, and I just sent it to the email address you gave me in the storage unit, Brenda said from beside her, slightly breathless, the personal phone already in her hand. It went 30 seconds ago. Serena looked at her. You sent it to all 3? While we were running, Brenda said. I'm a multitasker. The car moved through the Bridgeport streets at a pace that was fast enough to be purposeful and controlled enough not to attract attention. Serena pressed her back against the seat and let her lungs do what they needed to do. The recording was out. 3 locations. Reese was mobile and alive. The statement existed in a form that could survive whatever happened to any individual copy. She looked at her phone. A new text. Unknown number again, different from the last one. Not 3 words this time. An address. And below the address, a single line. Finch is here. You have 2 hours before we move him. She stared at the screen. Draven's phone buzzed at the same moment. He looked at it. His jaw tightened. He held the screen so she could see it. Same address. Same message. They were being led somewhere. Both of them simultaneously. The message hadn't gone to one of them and been forwarded to the other. It had gone to both at exactly the same time, which meant whoever sent it had both numbers, which meant the invitation was deliberate and the destination was prepared, and the 2 hours was not a deadline, but a... The address was a building on South Canal Street, a commercial development project that had stalled 18 months ago when the primary contractor ran into financing problems that Serena now understood with a clarity she hadn't possessed a week ago had not been accidental. The building was 42 stories of unfinished steel and concrete, wrapped in construction netting that moved in the wind off the lake like something breathing. The lower floors had been partially enclosed. The upper floors were open to the sky. Every city had buildings like this, monuments to interrupted ambition, too expensive to demolish and too compromised to complete, standing at the edge of things, waiting for someone to decide what they were going to become. The car stopped 2 blocks away. "We go in on foot," Draven said. Not a question. 2 hours was the window, Serena said. "We have 94 minutes. They'll have people inside already." "Then we go in knowing that." She looked at him. "Do you have a way to reach Holt directly?" "Not through Brenda. Direct." Draven reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a phone. Not his primary phone, a secondary one, prepaid by the look of it, and held it out. "Use this. It's not connected to either of us." She dialed Holt's mobile number from memory. He picked up on the second ring. "This is Serena Vale," she said. "I don't have time to explain the chain of events, and you're going to hear it all within the next few hours regardless. What I need from you right now is a response team at the building on South Canal Street, the stalled Meridian development, in 60 minutes. Not marked vehicles. Not a visible approach." She paused. "And Mr. Holt, run the name Daniel Voss through every financial connection to Meridian Development LLC before you arrive, because that building exists the way it does because of the same network we've been trying to reach the top of for the last 3 years." Silence. 4 seconds. The longest 4 seconds Holt had ever given a silence. "How credible is the threat at this location?" he said. "A federal informant named Garrett Finch may be held inside," she said. "I have a recorded statement from a direct source naming Senator Daniel Voss as the primary architect of the financing network. The recording has been sent to 3 secure locations. If Finch is alive, this is where he is. If you want him alive when you arrive..." 60 minutes, Holt said. "Stay outside the perimeter." She ended the call. She looked at Draven. "He said stay outside the perimeter," she said. "Are you going to?" Draven said. She handed him back the phone. "Finch sent those pages to me," she said. "He trusted me specifically. If he's in there and something goes wrong while I'm standing on the sidewalk following instructions..." She stopped. Restarted. "I've spent 12 years doing everything by the right channels through the right processes and trusting the right structures. Tonight I found out that some of those structures had a man named Voss behind them. So no, I'm not staying outside the perimeter." Draven looked at her for a moment with the expression she had finally found a name for over the last several hours. It wasn't admiration, it wasn't calculation. It was recognition, the expression of someone who saw something in another person that they understood from the inside. "My people can get us to the 6th floor via the service entrance on the south side," he said. "The upper floors are accessible by freight elevator or stairwell. The stairwells are open on the east face. No doors installed yet above the 4th floor." He said it with the confidence of someone who had reviewed the building's construction documents at some point and for reasons he had not shared. "If they have Finch, they'll want a controlled space. Upper floors, away from street access, with sight lines. How many people can you bring in without it becoming a signal?" 2, he said. "More than 2, and the approach reads differently." 2, she agreed. They moved. The service entrance on the south side was a gap in the hoarding around the building's base, temporary plywood sheeting that had been installed to keep the public out and had done that job imperfectly. One of Draven's people, a compact man named Ellis who communicated primarily through precise, economic gestures, had the panel open in under 40 seconds. They went in single file. Ellis, Draven, Serena, and a second man whose name she hadn't caught and didn't ask for. The inside of the building's lower floors had the unfinished quality of things that had been abandoned mid-thought. Concrete pillars, wire conduit hanging from above, the smell of cement dust and standing water and the particular cold of a space that had never been heated. Their footsteps found no carpet, no tile, nothing to soften them, and every step was an announcement to anything listening. Ellis moved differently in here, The slight adjustment that people made when they shifted from civilian movement to something older and more fundamental. Draven matched it. Serena did not match it because she didn't have it, but she was aware enough to watch their pace and their posture and copy what she could. They reached the stairwell on the fourth floor without encountering anyone. That was, she realized, the wrong thing to feel relieved about. No one on the lower floors meant the lower floors weren't the point. They went up. 7 floors. 8. The open face of the stairwell came into view on the 5th. No door, no enclosure, just a gap where a fire door would eventually live, and through it the night air and the city lights and the wind off the lake, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. Serena pressed her back against the interior wall of the stairwell each time they paused and breathed through her mouth and watched Ellis's hand signals and translated them as best she could. On the 9th floor, Ellis stopped. He held up one finger, then pointed left. One person. Left of the stairwell exit. Draven moved around Ellis with a quietness that Serena found she had stopped being surprised by. She had updated her understanding of what this man was capable of several times over the last 24 hours, and she suspected she wasn't finished. He went through the stairwell gap, and she heard nothing for approximately 8 seconds. Then silence of a different quality. Ellis went through. Serena followed. The 9th floor was a concrete slab with partial wall framing and no exterior enclosure on the north and east faces. Open air, the city beyond it in all directions. The lake a dark mass to the east. A man was seated against one of the interior pillars, zip-tied at the wrists, conscious but barely. His face was swollen on the left side in the specific systematic way that said it hadn't been an accident. His clothing was the same style as office casual, slacks, a button shirt, now both ruined. And despite the swelling, she recognized him from the photograph on page 31 of the 43 pages. Garrett Finch looked up at her with eyes that were trying to process whether her presence was good news or a continuation of the bad news he'd been living in for the last 4 days. "Attorney Vale," he said. His voice was damaged somewhere. "He said you'd come." "Who said?" she said, crouching in front of him. "Voss." Finch's head moved fractionally toward the east face of the floor, toward the open air. "He's here." Serena straightened. At the open east edge of the 9th floor. No railing, no enclosure, just the raw lip of concrete above an 8-story drop. Senator Daniel Voss stood with 2 men flanking him and looked at her with the expression of someone who had been expecting her and had prepared what he wanted to say. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, the build of a former athlete gone to institutional weight. He wore a dark overcoat, and he looked, in every external detail, like exactly what he had been for 22 years. A United States senator, a public servant, a man whose name appeared on 3 pieces of education legislation, and a federal housing reform bill that had been cited in law review articles that Serena had read in her 2nd year of law school. He looked like a statesman. "Attorney Vale," he said. His voice was the trained, modulated baritone of someone who had spent decades behind a microphone. "I've been following your career for some time." She said nothing. She was calculating the distance between Finch and the stairwell, the positions of Voss's 2 men, the location of Draven and Ellis somewhere to her left in the interior of the floor. "You're more resourceful than I anticipated," Voss said. "The account we built in your name was supposed to slow you down, create enough institutional confusion to buy us time to manage the situation." He glanced past her briefly, toward where Draven would be. "I didn't account for the fact that you'd go to him." "Mistakes happen," she said. Something crossed his face. Not anger, something older and more deliberate. "The recording you made tonight isn't going to survive the chain of custody challenges we're going to bring," he said. "Reese is a compromised witness with 11 years of criminal association. Draven is an organized crime figure. Anything obtained in that context goes to 3 media contacts the moment I send a single text," she said, "which I did 4 minutes ago, from the car, before I came in here." She hadn't. She had sent it to 2 media contacts, and one wasn't one she'd mentioned to Draven, an investigative journalist at a national outlet who had been waiting for 3 years for something she could verify. She'd sent it while Draven was speaking to Ellis from her own phone, without telling anyone. "The recordings don't need to survive your legal challenges if they've already been broadcast." Voss looked at her for a long moment. "You're bluffing," he said. "I spent 12 years in courtrooms," she said. I know the difference between a bluff and a position. I don't bluff when I have the position. Something changed in the quality of the silence on the floor. One of Voss's men moved. Not toward Serena, a different direction. Toward Finch against the pillar, the movement of someone receiving a signal she hadn't seen. She moved at the same time. Not toward the man. She wasn't going to win a physical confrontation with someone twice her weight, and she knew it. But between him and Finch, which forced the man to either stop or go through her, and going through her in front of a witness in a building that was about to be approached by federal agents, was a calculation he hadn't been prepared to make in the next half second. He stopped. Draven stepped out of the interior darkness to Serena's left. "Senator," he said. Voss looked at him. Something moved across the senior man's face. Not fear, not exactly, but the expression of a man who had spent 2 decades operating from positions of protected distance, suddenly understanding that the distance was gone. "You've been using my organization as a buffer," Draven said. He didn't move toward Voss. He stood at a distance of roughly 20 feet in the wind from the open east face, and he spoke with the specific flatness of someone who has confirmed something they suspected and found the confirmation less satisfying than they'd expected. "For 8 years, every time your network needed insulation from a federal prosecution, the trail led to my people. You financed operations you could attribute to me. You fed information to judges about cases that implicated me. When your shell companies needed a visible criminal context, my organization provided it." "Mr. Draven," Voss said, "you've been running an organized crime syndicate for a decade. I wouldn't overstate the injustice. You had 2 of my people killed in 2021, Draven said. Not because they were threats to anyone, because they were close to the Holloway Park financing trail and they were going to talk." His voice remained flat, not theatrical, just a man stating facts he had assembled over time. "I thought they were taken by a rival operation. I spent 18 months believing that." Voss said nothing. "You used my grief," Draven said, "as operational cover. Those were people I was responsible for, and you used what happened to them to make sure I kept looking in the wrong direction." The wind moved across the floor. Somewhere below, the city continued at its ordinary pace with complete indifference. Voss said, "What matters is what can be proven in a jurisdiction where I still have—" "The jurisdiction argument is gone," Serena said. "The recording, the wire transfer records, Reese's statement, the shell company documentation. It's assembled. It's out. What you have left is the choice about how this ends in the next 40 minutes. Voss looked at her. "You can run," she said. "You have resources and contacts, and you've been 3 steps ahead of this investigation for 8 years. Maybe you get somewhere. Maybe you don't. But Finch goes to a hospital tonight, and he talks, and you spend the rest of your life in whatever version of flight you manage." She paused. "Or you stay. And we do this the way I do everything. In a proceeding, on record. With representation and due process, and the full weight of the system you've been corrupting applied to your situation with the same rigor it's supposed to apply to everyone else's." "You're offering me due process," Voss said, with something in his voice that was almost amusement. "I'm telling you it exists," she said. "Whether you've earned access to it is not a question I answer. It applies regardless. That's the part you never understood about what I do." She held his gaze the way she held every hostile gaze, not with aggression, not with submission, with the absolute refusal to look away. "The law doesn't care how much damage you've done to it. It applies anyway. That's its one genuine virtue and its most profound inconvenience for people like you." Voss was quiet for a moment. His 2 men looked at him, the kind of look that said they were waiting for a direction that would tell them what kind of situation this was and how to respond to it. He didn't give them the direction. Something that had been coiled in him for the length of their conversation, a readiness, a contingency, released. She saw it go. It wasn't dramatic. It was a small adjustment in his posture, the settling of a weight he'd been holding upright through effort. "I want my attorney present before I say anything further," he said. "That's your right," she said. She heard the vehicles below, the specific quality of multiple engines cutting out simultaneously. Not traffic, something coordinated. Holt had arrived inside the 60-minute window, which she hadn't been certain of until this moment. She was grateful for the uncertainty's resolution in a way that moved through her body before she could intellectualize it. Ellis appeared at the stairwell gap and made a gesture. Draven nodded. I need you to come with me, Serena said to Voss. Not as a threat, as information. There are federal agents below. You're going to walk down with me and this is going to begin. Whatever happens after tonight, the proceedings, the representation, the charges, that all comes after tonight. Tonight is just the beginning of the after. Voss looked at her. He looked at Draven. He looked at Finch, still against the pillar, watching everything with the patient attention of a man who had been waiting for this specific sequence of events for 4 days and was not going to waste it by losing consciousness before it concluded. He looked back at Serena. After you, he said. What followed was neither clean nor swift, and she would remember it that way without regret. Holt was in the building's ground level with 4 agents when they came down, and the moment in which Voss was formally detained had none of the clarity of a courtroom verdict. It was a corridor with temporary lighting and dust on every surface, and a man in a good overcoat being read his rights in a voice that bounced off unfinished concrete walls, while somewhere above them the wind moved through the open floors of a building that had been built on money that had cost people their lives. Finch came down on a makeshift stretcher. One of Holt's agents had field medical training, and Serena walked beside him for the 4 flights between the 9th floor and the ground. The pages, he said, midway down the 3rd flight. His voice was still damaged, and she had to lean slightly to hear him. Did they hold up? They held up, she said. I wasn't sure, he said. About you. I wasn't sure you'd... He stopped, working through something that was partly pain and partly the particular exhaustion of someone who had been sustained by a single purpose for an extended period and was beginning to feel the structure of that purpose release. I pulled everything I could find on you. Your cases, your appeals, your disciplinary record. You've never had a complaint filed against you in 12 years. That's a very low bar, she said. In this space, he said, it's not. She looked at him. The swollen face, the careful way he was being carried, the fact that he was alive. The fact that the man who had decided, from inside a broken system, to throw 43 pages at a stranger and trust something as fragile and improbable as a clean record, was alive. You should have come to me directly, she said. I know, he said. I was afraid. I know, she said. They reached the ground floor. Brenda found her 40 minutes later, outside, on the sidewalk where the construction hoarding met the street. Serena was sitting on a concrete barrier with her jacket collar turned up against the wind, and a cup of coffee she didn't remember accepting from someone. Brenda sat beside her without being invited and without asking if the space was available. For a while, neither of them said anything. Holt has Voss in custody, Brenda said finally. Reese is in protective custody and talking. Marchetti, the woman who opened the account in your name, was picked up 40 minutes ago at O'Hare. She was running, Serena said. She was running. The 2 judges Reese named? Under review. Administrative hold on their caseloads pending investigation. Brenda's voice was careful and tired. Kate's was placed on emergency administrative leave 2 hours ago. A pause. She's cooperating. Serena absorbed that. The woman whose standards she had used as a benchmark for 12 years, cooperating with a federal investigation into her own corruption. She had thought, somewhere between the parking garage and the 9th floor of an unfinished building, that she would feel something definitive about that when the time came. She felt something, but it wasn't definitive. It was complicated and sad, and had edges she wasn't going to be able to identify all of tonight. The account in my name, she said. Being dismantled, Brenda said. The documentation establishing it as fraudulent is in the system. Holt's official position is that you are a cooperating witness and potential victim of financial identity fraud. His official position, Serena said. What's his actual position? Brenda was quiet for a moment. He's not entirely happy about the way tonight happened, she said. The Bridgeport house, the building. None of that followed. No, Serena agreed. It didn't. He's also not going to say that publicly, Brenda said, because the outcome is what it is, and Voss is in custody, and Finch is alive, and the recordings are intact. He'll be less unhappy when the unhappiness becomes inconvenient, Serena said. That's a very accurate read of Warren Holt, yes. Serena drank the coffee. It was from a deli somewhere. Someone had run for food during the controlled chaos of the last hour. And the coffee was bad in the specific way of deli coffee at midnight, and she was grateful for it. I need to ask you something, she said. Okay. 4 months ago, when you started suspecting there was a problem inside the evidence chain, Serena said. If you had told me then, you would have done something with it, Brenda said. Immediately, visibly. You would have filed something or confronted someone, or I would have. And it would have tipped them off 6 months before we had anything solid enough to survive the legal challenges they'd throw at it. Brenda's voice wasn't apologetic. It was honest, which Serena valued more. I made a choice about how to protect an investigation that I thought was more important than warning a colleague that she was working in a compromised environment, Serena said. Yes, Brenda said, flatly. That's what I prioritized. Serena sat with that. I'm not forgiving you for that tonight, she said. I want you to know that I understand it. Those are different things. I know, Brenda said. Ask me again in 6 months. Okay, Brenda said. They sat in the wind for a while longer. She found Draven near the south face of the building, apart from the federal activity that had colonized the perimeter, standing in a gap between two construction barriers where the light didn't reach well. He was alone. Ellis and the second man had gone sometime in the last hour, leaving no particular trace of their presence. She stood near him, not beside him, not facing him, at a slight angle, the way people stood when they needed proximity without the formality of a position. Reese is in custody, she said. I know. He'll testify about everything, including what he knows about your organization. I know that too, Draven said. She looked at him. What happens now? He was quiet for a moment. Below the quiet, something she had been aware of for several hours without naming, a quality of resignation that was different from defeat. The resignation of someone who had arrived at a conclusion through a long process and was standing now on the other side of it. I made a decision before tonight, he said. A few days before. When the envelope reached you and I understood what Finch had done and why. He looked at the building above them, the dark unfinished floors, the construction netting moving. My father built the organization believing that power in the right hands could protect people that institutions had abandoned. That's what he told himself. What he told us. A pause. He wasn't wrong about the institutions. He was wrong about the power. What decision? She said. I've been in contact with Holt, he said, through a channel that isn't you and isn't Reese, directly, for the last 72 hours. He looked at her. I'm going to provide testimony. Comprehensive testimony. Everything I know about the organization's operations, its financing, its history of being used by the people above it. All of it. He paused. In exchange for cooperation agreements for the members of my organization who were unaware of the level of the corruption above them. There are people who made choices they can't undo, but who made them without knowing the full picture. I want them to have access to that context in their proceedings. She looked at him for a long time. You'll face charges yourself, she said. Yes. You've known that coming into this. Yes. He held her gaze. I've been running something that did damage, counselor. Whether it was used by people above me doesn't erase the damage it did. I've known that for a long time. I've spent years trying to dismantle it from within, which turns out to be a slow and insufficient method. Your testimony will be challenged, she said. Voss's attorneys are going to take everything you provide and try to... I know what they'll try, he said. I know the system well enough by now to understand the process. A slight shift in his expression, not quite the almost smile from the parking garage, something quieter than that. I was told once that the law doesn't care how much damage you've done to it. It applies anyway. She was quiet for a moment. I said that 40 minutes ago, she said. It stuck, he said. She looked at him. The wind off the lake was cold and consistent, and the city lights caught the construction netting above them and turned it into something that moved like water. I won't represent you, she said. I can't. Our history in these cases creates conflicts I can't navigate. I know, he said. I wasn't going to ask, but I can tell you that the attorneys who do this kind of cooperation work well. There are 3 in this city worth considering, and I can give you names that aren't connected to the network we just dismantled. I'd appreciate that, he said. She nodded. They stood in the gap between the barriers for another moment. The parking garage, she said. A week ago. Yes. You said you wanted to see what my face looked like when it wasn't performing for a courtroom. He looked at her, waiting. What did you see? She said. He considered the question with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, thorough, unhurried, without the impulse to fill the space with an easier answer. Someone who was afraid, he said, and had decided it didn't matter. She looked at him. That's accurate, she said. She held out her hand. He looked at it for a brief moment, then took it. A handshake, nothing else, firm and brief. The handshake of two people who had been through something together and would not be in each other's lives in the same way after tonight, and both understood this without needing to say it. She walked back toward the perimeter. In the weeks that followed, the proceedings moved with the combined velocity of multiple agencies that had been waiting for something solid to hold and had finally received it. Senator Daniel Voss was indicted on 37 counts. Judge Marilyn Cates entered a cooperation agreement and was disbarred. The other two judges, named by Reese, resigned within 48 hours of their names appearing in sealed federal documents that were not sealed enough to prevent their circulation. Theo Marchetti, apprehended at O'Hare, became the prosecution's most comprehensive witness on the financial architecture of the network, providing documentation that connected the shell companies to 4 additional corporate entities Serena had never heard of, and that the federal investigation would spend the better part of a year untangling. Garrett Finch spent 11 days in a hospital. His injuries were significant but not permanent. When he was discharged, Serena met him in the hospital lobby. He had asked her to come, through Brenda, and she had. They sat in a corner of the lobby, near a window, while outside the city went about itself in its usual way. "I want to apologize," he said. His face had healed enough to read clearly. He looked tired in the bone-deep way of someone who had been operating on adrenaline and purpose for a long time, and had now been given the experience of its absence. "For putting you in that position without warning. You made a decision with the options you had," she said. "I understand the decision." "You could have been killed," he said. "A lot of things could have happened," she said. "What happened is that you're sitting in a hospital lobby. I'll take it." He looked at his hands. "I spent 8 months watching people I thought I could trust use the system as a personal resource. Judges, federal personnel, the people who are supposed to be the structure." He shook his head slightly. "I started to think the structure wasn't real, that it was all performance, institutional theater." "Parts of it were," she said. "Parts of it are. That's true. But you kept working in it." "Because the parts that aren't theater matter," she said. "They matter to the people who don't have any other option. I don't get to opt out of the system because the system is imperfect. Neither do the people who need it." He looked at her. "Is that what keeps you going?" he said. She thought about it honestly. About 12 years of late nights and cold coffee and client meetings and courtroom arguments and the specific feeling of watching a jury file back in and not knowing, and the other specific feeling of the verdict when it went right. She thought about the parking garage and the 43 pages and a 9th floor with no railing and a man in an expensive coat making the small internal movement of something being released. "That," she said, "and the fact that I'm not very good at anything else." He laughed. It was short and a little raw and completely genuine. Lucien Draven entered a federal courthouse 7 weeks after the night on South Canal Street. He entered through the front doors in the morning with an attorney beside him, and no convoy, no detail, no black SUVs idling at the curb. He wore a dark suit, and he walked up the steps at the pace of someone who had decided to be precisely where they were going and had made the decision thoroughly enough that the question of turning back had become genuinely uninteresting. Serena was not inside the courthouse that day. She was in a different courthouse 3 blocks away, in the middle of a hearing for a client who had nothing to do with any of the last 7 weeks. An insurance dispute, unglamorous and procedurally dense, and exactly the kind of ordinary work that the practice of law consisted of on most days. The work that didn't make news and didn't get referenced in federal proceedings, and simply had to be done correctly because a person's situation depended on it. She heard about Draven's arrival from Dom Reyes, who sent her a text during a recess. "He went in the front door," the text said. "Thought you'd want to know." She read it standing in a courthouse corridor with her case files under her arm and her phone in her hand. She stood there for a moment in the ordinary noise of a working courthouse. Lawyers moving, clerks carrying documents, the distant sound of proceedings in session. And she thought about front doors and what it meant to choose them. She put the phone in her pocket. She went back into the hearing. She did her job. Outside, the city continued, complicated and compromised and alive in the way of things that keep going despite everything, which is not the same as redemption, but is sometimes, on the right days, close enough. The courthouse doors closed behind her, and for the first time in 7 weeks, the city felt like it was running at the same speed she was. Not faster, not with something pulling ahead of her that she had to keep chasing. Just the ordinary, difficult pace of things that mattered, moving forward, the way they always had, the way they had to, regardless of what any single person did or didn't do to deserve it. That would have to be enough. It was.